and Washington Post columnist Ruth Marcus. Mark Shields is off today. Welcome to you. So, go back to the top of the show. Good news, David, on the jobs front. Good news for the economy, even as Washington dysfunction continues.
Yeah, we overestimate how much effect Washington has. It's sort of like you're so vain, you really think this economy is about you. I've asked a bunch of business leaders.
You don't want to sing that for us.
I don't, right? Not with my voice today. I've asked a bunch of business leaders, how over the past 5 years, what government actions have really affected a concrete decision you've made? Mm-hmm. And you get answers all over the lot. There's no consensus at all on this question. The number one answer I get is uncertainty. I can't plan because healthcare costs, because financial regulations. The number two answer I get is nothing. I can't think of any way the government, even the big stimulus. The third answer I get is the stimulus helped us. And the fourth answer I get is some other thing. And so I think what we do here in Washington has an effect on the macroeconomy. Mm-hmm. But the idea that the fiscal cliff or the little things we're doing here and now, that even the sequester, which is all bad government, the idea that it has a huge effect on hiring decisions, I remain dubious.
But the sequester, of course, in the run-up to all that, many economists said that's bad. The president, of course, was saying it could be very bad.
Sky's falling.
Yeah.
I would disagree with David because I do think that what happens in Washington does matter. It just doesn't simply matter instantly. So we haven't seen built into these job numbers any of the impact of the sequester. And I think it's important to remember we avoided the fiscal cliff, but there still was, with the expiration of that payroll tax holiday, a drag on the economy. There is definitely going to be a drag on the economy with the impact of the sequester when it starts to be felt. That's going to be in a month or two and in a rolling way. So this is a terrific jobs number. That's good, but this has been a slow and fragile recovery, and nobody should celebrate too much just yet or discount, sorry, David, the impact of Washington.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously there are drags, and I agree. Things are drags, but there are also pluses out there, the lowering of oil, of gas prices. Yeah. That's obviously a plus. So there's a complex mixture of things.
But from a political standpoint, do you take it further and say, did the president overplay his hand to some degree in saying the sky is falling toward the sequestration?
Yeah, I mean, I thought sequestration was absolutely terrible policy. So from the point of view of are we running a decent government, it was terrible. From the point of view do people want a sign that their government can actually function? And does that overall level of confidence affect economic performance? I think he was right about that. If he was saying, well, a 0.25% drop in federal spending or whatever it was going to be is going to have an immediate economic effect on hiring decisions, that was probably oversold.
What do you think about the politics of the sequestration right now? Because we spent so much time talking after the election about the president has the upper hand, right? And the Republicans are down. Has it flipped at all now?
Well, the president has the upper hand because he's the president, by definition, but he's still got a Republican House to deal with. I want to go back for just a second on the sequester because we had this odd thing. During the campaign, we refused. When I say we, I mean President Obama and Mitt Romney declined to talk about the fiscal cliff, declined to talk about the sequester.
I didn't think she was talking about all of us.
Even after the election, we didn't hear about the sequester for a while. Then, all of a sudden, the administration way overplayed its hand by making it seem as if the sky was imminently falling. We may well feel, we probably will feel the impact of these things, not just in the macroeconomy, but because it's a small part of overall government spending, but it is a large part of government spending on some particular programs. Wait for those airport lines. David's going to be on a flight later tonight. I'm sure he will be whisked right to the front. So now the president has completely flipped again. He's gone from sky is falling, let's go out and trumpet to the country how terrible and irresponsible these Republicans are, to cozying up with them in this mealtime diplomacy.
Yes, so that's where I wanted to go. I mean, the president has dinner. He invites 12 Republicans to a hotel in Washington, neutral territory. What do you make of that? Is it useful? Is it helpful?
First, I'm shocked that Ruth thinks I'm flying commercial, which I never do. I am flying commercial. I want to make that clear. So I think
he's in a different economy altogether from
us. So I think it's vastly overdue. If those of us who interview these people have a sense that you interview them separately, and they do a lot of time guessing about what the other party is thinking. And then a lot of times what you heard this especially from Republicans, wildly inaccurate views of what Obama was proposing. let alone what he believed in private. And so the idea was, why don't you guys just get together? And I remember thinking this 4 or 5 years ago. Paul Ryan and Barack Obama are two wonks. If they could actually sit around a table, and you'd think he's had a lot of lunches since he's been president, just choose one and have Paul Ryan come over. And so it's always mystified me that it hasn't happened, but it has happened. And so far the effect has entirely, as far as we can tell, been entirely positive.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's great that it's happened. I question why it didn't happen sooner, either 4 years ago or 2 months ago. I also think that, yes, the first results are entirely positive, but it is a long way from dinner to dessert.
Yeah.
And yes, there are some signs of what the president called the common sense caucus in the Senate, some willingness from Senator McCain, Senator Ayotte, Senator Graham to accept some new revenue as part of tax reform, and if you combine it with controlling entitlement spending. That's all terrific, and the president ought to be able to agree to that. But there is that thing I mentioned earlier, which is even if you could get an agreement on that in that grand bargain that we keep sitting here talking about, how do you get it past the House, where there seems to be, I interviewed Paul Ryan the other day, absolutely no willingness to accept new revenue, even as part of tax reform.
And the president is next week continuing this, right? He goes to Capitol Hill 4 times. Including to talk to the House Republicans.
You know, obviously the basic structural problems are not going to go away with a few meals. But I do think there's been a sort of a lowering of the desire to ratchet every discussion up into World War III. And so I think on the budget, where they seem to have jointly decided, let's stop having these budget fights. And so on some of the thinking how to get past the sequester or really lock in the sequester, they seem to have said, let's have a compromise that we won't raise all the hot button issues. We'll just try to get through these things so we get on to other stuff. I think the meals have helped a little on that.
They've decided to temporarily halt all these budget fights, so we won't. I think it's highly unlikely we'll have a government shutdown at the end of March. But I really would keep an eye on, yes, once again, the debt ceiling debate that we're going to have come May, June, July.
I'm resisting more meal metaphors here, but to move on to another phenomenon this week, which was the filibuster by Rand Paul. He had a lot of Republicans praising him, right, off the bat, and then 24 hours later, he got hammered by John McCain, Lindsey Graham. So what do you make of the divisions there?
Well, it's very interesting. First of all, I would say it's not particularly senatorial to call your colleague a wacko bird. That's an interesting way to get along with everybody. That's what Senator McCain had to say about Senator Paul. Look, there are a bunch of divisions in the Republican Party: social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, isolationists, neocon, democracy promoters, and this is another one between libertarians and those who believe in strong executive authority, and particularly during the war on terror. We didn't hear a lot from that group during the Bush administration. Now you have a Democratic president that may have enhanced it a little bit. I thought that Senator Paul did a good service in the sense that he brought attention to this drone issue, which has been underattended to in terms of what are we doing, where are we doing it, what is the legal basis for it, who exactly is doing it. Those are all legitimate questions. The problem I had with what he did was that he was asking exactly the wrong question, which was conjuring up this fanciful notion that we could be attacked right here, right now, by some president run amok. That's not going to happen. The Attorney General told him it wasn't going to happen. He refused to take no for an answer. But I do think that the sort of larger question of drone transparency is a valuable one.
Well, is it a legitimate debate over national security within the party? And is it a debate that has future consequences, political consequences?
Well, it's an ancient debate. If you go back to Robert Taft, the Republican Party has had a reasonably strong anti-military wing, not anti-military, but anti-interventionist wing. And that goes back for decades. It was sort of quieted. It tends to grow when there's a Democrat in the White House. So when Bill Clinton was contemplating action in Kosovo, suddenly it got very big again. When a Republican is president, it vanishes. And it'll vanish again when there's any sense of a threat. So, for example, there were a lot of people who were cheering Ron Paul on, like Rush Limbaugh, because he was jabbing the president. But if it comes time that there's some American threat and there's a need for a military intervention somewhere, they'll be with John McCain and Lindsey Graham.
But he's not also jabbing the Republican establishment at the same time?
But I think they like the fact that he's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And so I do think what it looks like his side of the debate is bigger than it was 5 years ago. There's no question about that. But it looks artificially inflated compared to where it is now.
All right, just a couple of minutes, and I wanted to turn from politics to a sort of cultural marker, which is the chief operating officer of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, has a new book, Lean In, prompting a discussion of whether women can have it all or whether just the best off women can have it all. What do you think? Is it a cultural moment? Is it a useful moment?
It's a constant cultural moment. It seems like the endless debate, and I imagine some woman sitting in this chair 20, 30 years from now having exactly the same discussion, probably with a couple guys, nothing personal.
I'll still be here.
Dave will still be here.
Yeah, we'll try to be here, I guess.
Look, we had this conversation last summer when Anne Marie Slaughter of the State Department wrote what I thought was a not terribly well thought through piece called Why Women Still Can't Have It All. Sheryl Sandberg's book is very interesting because she talks admittedly, she acknowledges this. I am privileged. Most women who work don't have the flexibility I do. Many women who do have the flexibility I do haven't made the same choices I do. That's all fine. But she talks not just about bias or discrimination, conscious or unconscious, in the workplace, but about the ways in which women, consciously or unconsciously, contribute to their own inability to have it all or lack of success. And I think it's going to spark a very, very interesting debate.
In the man's view?
If you dare.
As a conservative, you can't have it all. This is the essence of conservatism. No one can have it all. There are always trade-offs in life. The world isn't structured so you can have it all. I will say two things. One, why are so few women crossing the CEO ceiling? I think the evidence is overwhelmingly it's childbirth. There's some sexism in there, but it's primarily a lot of women who do not want to commit themselves to that sort of life. And so it's that. Second, I'm just struck, Kate Royfer wrote a good piece about this in Slate magazine, why so much hostility toward her, especially from feminist circles. It's as if a lot of people want to have women successful, but when they actually have a very successful woman, they're extremely hostile to her because she's out of touch or she doesn't get it. So my sympathy is mostly with her.
All right, I'll give you one sentence if you can rebut whatever or respond in one sentence.
I think Sheryl Sandberg's point about childbirth is, yes, and you might make different choices, but don't cut off your choices before you know that's what you want to do. Keep yourself in the mix. And you know what? Have the guts, as she does, to leave the office at 5:30 and then check in from home.
All right, a discussion we've started, and actually we're going to try to continue it on the program next week.